Thank you all for tuning back in with us for Reality Capture Live. If you are new here, welcome in. We are excited to join you along your reality capture journey. We have some really fun things in store for you guys today. And we're just excited that you're here. This is going to be a super fun conversation. Like I said, if you're new here, thank you for tuning in with us. If you've been here before, welcome back. We're excited that you're here with us again. We just have a lot of fun stuff in store for this conversation. We've had two amazing conversations to go back and tune into if you haven't seen and checked those out. But today, we are going to be talking all things the reality of robotics. This is going to be amazing. One, for the people that are here, I'm excited to introduce you guys to them here soon. But then also, just the topic itself. This is one thing that when we were kind of thinking about this idea of reality capture and what are some of the things that we want to highlight and focus on, robotics was one of those that came up the most. And so we just think this is really going to be a fun topic and conversation. One, not only because of the topic, but the people itself. Like I said, I want to get to introducing these guests that we have on today, and just really excited that you guys are here. One quick thing. Join the conversation. So we do these live. This is actually live. This is not pre-recorded. We hear and see your guys' questions. I have it down here and seeing what you guys are listening in or commenting in on. So tell us where you're tuning in from. We love to see those comments in there. I added a new little dinger. So when you do have a question or comment, I'm excited to kind of see where that's at, or if we can pause and answer some of that. So please do join in. It's a really fun to see your guys' comments into these things. And we just hope that you guys are as much excited about these conversations and engage with us as possible. So really quick, we're going to run through these really fast. Why reality capture, what you can expect, and how you can engage. Really, a core value at DroneDeploy is to simplify. And that was really the heart behind why we're doing this. We think reality capture should be simple, and it should be simple to understand. There should be resources to better educate yourself around it. And that's really where this is tuning in from. And so we just want to help bring this idea and simplify reality capture as much as possible around these topics that you guys are curious to know more about. And that's really why we're getting into some of these things. So that's the why. What you can expect. We've been on here before the last few weeks with some amazing guests. We're going to have another great set of guests on here today. But what you can expect is just experts, really experts on this topic with the same mission in mind to help simplify reality capture. So we have a really fun way for you guys to engage with us. I'm seeing some notes and some comments in here already, so I'm going to bring that little dinger back. Hopefully that's fun. And as you guys are popping in those comments, would love to see more of those tuning in. So we just want to get in right to it. So who is going to be with us today? One, these guests are really, I think, the best and brightest. And I don't say that lightly. I've got to meet each of these guys individually and then also work with them as we're trying to put together content for this. And these guys are just awesome. Like, they're super personable. They're very well educated on this topic. And I think you guys are just going to gain a ton of knowledge out of this time together today. One is Chris McKee. He works with the Turner team. Really just the boots on the ground person that you're going to get a lot of what this looks like all together. Really excited that he was on here. I got to meet him last year on site and was just like, dude, Chris, how do we hang out more? How can we get you in front of more people to help simplify this idea of what you're doing? So he's going to be a great guest on with us today. Haydn, who is on our robotics team here on the DroneDeploy team. First time I met Haydn was last year at our user conference. I was like, dude, how do I get you on more things? Just another great resource. I found this picture, Hayden. I didn't tell you about this, but when we were out on site with Chris and the team, we had a little competition of who could do more push-ups, him or Spot. Clearly Spot won on that one. So really excited to have Hayden on here. And then Brian, I'm sure if you follow anything on Boston Dynamics side, on the social side, Brian is the principal product manager over some things over there. And so just super excited to have him on as well. This is just going to be a really, really great time. So tell us where you're tuning in from and on the comments. We'd love to see you guys engage on some of that. And without further ado, I'm really pumped to bring these guys in. So Chris, Hayden, Brian, thank you guys for making the time to tune in with us. Really excited that you guys are here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Cool. This is going to be really, really fun. Really the format around what we wanted to kind of do for this session, and if you've tuned in with us before, is really kind of go through this idea of how do we define this idea of robotics? What are kind of some of the misconceptions around this idea? And then really getting into some like crawl, walk, and run. Okay, like now that I understand it, what do I do with this information? And so would really love, I'm going to just kind of start it off before we get into some things, Chris, of tell us a little bit about your background, how long you've been on the Turner team, and just give some folks some runway with your background.
Yeah, so I've been with Turner for 5 years. I've been surveying for about 30. and I'm very curious with just everything. So it didn't take long for me to get involved with robotics and laser scanning and all that jazz. Um, I I really got involved with it when our headquarters in New York got Spot from Boston Dynamics and started testing it, and I immediately started lobbying for us. I'm like, we can use that on the site. I know we can. So um, we got it, and we took it to a whole new level. But it took a lot of work. We had to find the right combination of software to people with Haydn and DroneDeploy. That was a huge uh, link that was missing that really helped out. But yeah, having a survey background really makes a huge difference with positioning because we have to survey in a lot of things that Spot uses. Um, Terrestrial scanning, you got to have that kind of background, and it really makes a difference with how you use it. So it's not just knowing how to run a robot, but knowing the ins and outs of positioning that robot where it is on planet Earth.
Yeah,
makes a big difference. But,
we were just talking about that before you hopped in with us in kind of the pre-huddle here of like, man, Chris's background in, I think, just the survey space has just such an elevated lift for you to have a really good understanding of how this works, really the environment in which it works in. And so I just remember the first time I met you, I was like, man, I feel like I'm walking away much smarter about a lot of things that I didn't coming into it. So it was really fun.
I made a lot of mistakes in the way. So
we did a couple, just a few. They're not mistakes; they're only learning opportunities, right?
Right.
Brian, I'm going to kick it down to you. Tell us a little bit about your background over at Boston Dynamics, and just kind of give us a little insight into how you got to what we're doing today.
Yeah, for sure. I'd come out of the architecture and construction industry. I was actually one of the very first paying North American customers for Spot. For a lot of the things that Chris is successfully doing today, we wanted to do those things. And then in 2019, toward the end of the year, I joined Boston Dynamics to focus really on what are the applications of this robot, what are the solutions in the construction space, and in kind of mapping and reality capture at large.
Love it. And Haydn down there, which a little came from the Rocos team, which we'll get into a little bit, but now sits on the DroneDeploy team as well. And Haydn, give us a little background of how you got to kind of where you're at before the Rocos team and before even coming onto the DroneDeploy side.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. So for DroneDeploy, I'm a product specialist for the automation and robotics team. But I actually started in the construction space, so civil engineering, large infrastructure projects, sort of hands on the ground on construction, and then sort of realized, like Chris mentioned, everything in the world's very important as to where it goes. So I had a real interest in the geospatial component, and then sort of slipped into doing a lot of surveying, and then that obviously evolved into surveying and reality capture, and then decided to take a break from reality capture and then work for one of the Leica distributors as a reality capture, I guess, specialist, selling and training and helping people learn how to laser scan and use the data effectively. And then it was kind of like this hybrid of experience and skill set that kind of put me into a position here I say at Rocos, but at the DroneDeploy robotics team, to help customers like Chris actually onboard robots, understand how all these technologies can come together, and what's the practical deployment, and how do we sort of set up a workflow that's successful to achieve what's practical in construction. So yeah, quite a unique background really, that's a bit of a niche, at least in this space, but it's really been great to help people like Chris and to sort of be able to relate to a construction site and to a VDC team on what we need to actually get done.
Yeah, totally. We got so many different time zones in here too. One, so obviously Ohio, Chris, where you're at, Brian, New York. Hayden's out in New Zealand, and so just to give some preface here of he's definitely blessing us with his time in a completely different time zone. And I didn't even ask what like actual time is it there? You didn't even say no or shake a no when I asked you to come in here.
No, it's not too bad. It's 7 o'clock at the moment, so
Okay,
10 past
cool.
7 in the morning. You did get me out of bed early to prepare and make sure that I was actually presentable by the time you wanted to start. So,
Hey, well, you look great. Excited that that you're here. Thanks for joining. And what's interesting too is all of our backgrounds in construction. I think that's what's interesting here, and we'll definitely touch on even obviously use cases outside of construction. But really interesting. I didn't actually know that, and kind of coming into some of these conversations. But it's really interesting too. I think a big goal coming out of this for anyone that is tuning in with us is really just the applicability. I laugh because Brian, when we were talking on this before, made a really good comment about just robots and just the definition of it, which we'll get into, and really how it's more solutions based. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but just this idea of like, hey, do we even call it robotics, right? Because we really want these things to be known as solutions, really solver for a lot of different industries, but obviously all of ours back in the construction side. So I'm going to transition us over here a little bit to really breaking down really the title of what we kind of called this was the reality of robotics. What does it mean? Why should I care? How do I get started? That's kind of the format that we're kind of following in here. And I'm curious, maybe Chris, and I know you haven't seen this actually before I kind of pull up this slide here. I found this definition, and I actually found it to be pretty applicable here if I move over a slide. And really what I liked about it, and I'm curious to kind of get your opinion on it, Chris, is the engineering operation, like machines that can autonomously or semi-autonomously perform physical tasks on behalf of a human. Typically, robots perform tasks that are either highly repetitive, too dangerous, or a human to carry out safely. So, like, do you like that definition? Or maybe a better question to ask is like, how do you define what some of like the robotics that you work with to other people? Because I think that's oftentimes it's such a broad term that I think gets lost in a lot of people's kind of like, how do you even go to start to just because obviously with your surveying background, there's a lot of robotics in that. But how do you describe kind of this idea of robotics to other people?
That's a really good definition. When we have to go to different job sites, we ask them, what task do you have that's repeatable? So what is it that you do over and over and over again? Like, let's say, take pictures that get uploaded to a platform that you can view it. Well, if you've got someone out there doing it, going to the same spot over and over again, that's what robotics does. If you have to go into a space and do a scan, repeatability, repeated it over and over again, that we can use that for robotics. Like we have rooms that we go into that we do stages of scans before walls go up, and then after the walls go up, and then when the ceiling, above ceiling goes on, and then after the ceiling goes up, and then a final scan. That can all be done with robotics. Anything that deals with just that constant repeatability. But that's a really good description. I like it. I'm going to use that.
And I'm curious, Brian, too, like I'm sure you get asked this a ton, and really what I'm hoping to do is kind of preface into what we were talking about a little before we hopped on here too. But like, how do you guys see this term of robotics? Because obviously Spot's gotten a ton of attention and people obviously associate it being a robot per definitions, even like this. But how do you kind of bridge that definition line, I guess, of how robotics is seen from the Boston Dynamics side?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I approach it is that there's these words mean nothing and they mean everything, right? So there's definitely a collection of new technologies that when we figure out how to use them in collaboration with human intelligence, allow us to do things both creatively and in business that just wouldn't be possible with either people alone or with these technologies alone. But like specifically with physical automation and the type of walking robots, this new class of agile mobile robots that can move around the world and manipulate the world and interact with people, that is something that's new. So as a company, our mission is really to show all of the positive uses of that and how that actually enriches our lives. Because, it takes some getting used to. I think it's one of the hardest things about making this technology useful is getting past kind of the distraction of how new and novel it is.
Yeah. And Haydn, I've kind of even heard it said like internally on our team a lot when we talk about automation, and sometimes that's synonymous with robotics. It's like it removes the dull, dirty, and dangerous tasks. And I don't know if like you kind of subscribe to this definition too, or there's other ways that you kind of help describe it to people. But You're clearly in this space quite a bit, not only with tools like Spot, but others as well that we'll talk about. But like, how do you kind of define some of this as well?
Yeah, I think as we've, I'll say, evolved over the last 2 years at least, we tending away from identifying as robotic people, but more towards automation. So that's probably the key thing is that we robotics, as maybe seen in the past, is sort of like a spot or something on the ground that moves, whereas we sort of focus on how do we automate a job that needs to be done. So customer or a particular industry has a thing they want to do. How do we enable them with a set of technologies and a workflow that can achieve that in a semi or autonomous way to make it either less painful or more efficient for the business? So yeah, those three D words come in. I think there's probably splattered on every single robotics page out there that someone's selling is that whole dull, dangerous, and dirty. In terms of the dangerous tasks, yeah, there's a place for that. Dull and dirty, I mean, that's obvious, really. Who wants to spend? I mean, I've done it because I've had to spend a week on a solar farm getting a robot to do a job, which that person would have to do, and it's horrible. It's
Mhm.
oh man, the conditions aren't meant for humans to be there every day. So why not put a robot there that an operator could either drive or it's collecting information on its own? Um, or in fact, you'll see a bit later, but have 6 of these robots spread across 6 different sites and have one person sitting cozy at home being able to do the job of 6 different people and not even break a sweat at home. So I think, yeah, we're tending towards autonomy rather than trying to identify as robot handlers, if that makes any sense.
Something to add to that too, that it the you got some of these students that are coming out of universities that are paid a whole lot of money, and on some of our sites, that some of their task is to take pictures. And do you want to go with a 4-year degree in engineering to take pictures? So for us, it was like we can take that person and we can move them into a position where we can start training them and use automation and Spot to do those tasks, and then it frees up that position to actually get trained on their work. So that was a huge benefit for us, is to take that task away from them. And sometimes it was kind of a not really an argument, but kind of like, are you sure you want to do this?
Mm.
And like, once we prove that fact, and that it can be done, then it was like, oh, okay, yeah, yeah. So we need, and then they said, well, we need you, the engineer. Okay, go up to the 26th floor and start
Yep.
worrying about sheet metal and see if that can, benefit them learning. So it wasn't just the fact that we were using it to take care of these tasks. It was the fact that we were freeing up other people to 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 do the job that we need them to do.
Yeah, well said. And there's so many ways we can go for it. Hayden, you got something you want to add?
Oh, man, I can relate with that 100%. I went out of university into construction industry and having, I would say, ambitions, but like, you've just spent 4 years around bright minds doing amazing things, and then all of a sudden you become a Excel expert that can create paper forms and then learn how to, be a wizard on a spreadsheet because that's the only piece of technology that the company's invested in, really. And then you sit and struggle and you wish and you hope and you find all these amazing things to use, but it's a slow ball to turn in construction. And you just think how many graduates or how many sort of entry level engineers kind of lose interest, or get swayed, like retention for a company, for instance, that isn't doing or doesn't have a sort of technology plan or a way of like onboarding the future. How these sort of they can't retain these guys. These guys want to go to companies that turn around and say, hey, we've got this like team that does this amazing VDC thing and a robot, and this is the 5-year vision of what this robot's going to do. Do you want to be a part of that? And you're like, of course. I'm not going to stay in this company and just play on Excel for the next 3 or 4 years. So I relate 100% to what Chris is saying there. There's more to it than just doing that one job. There's a whole sort of culture that it sort of brings into the company as well.
You're getting into the hot takes really quickly, Hayden, which I love. But it's true though. I think which is actually a really good segue into this kind of slide. And Chris, I stole this from you. And imagine, so some of these graduates coming out of school, right? If we're just going to camp there for a little bit, and they see the involvement of these types of robotics at these companies that they're going to pursue, right? And these are a little bit construction specific, right? Because Chris, you had kind of made this slide here, but yeah, I mean, this is super exciting, right? When you start to look at some of this stuff and you think about the automation at play, and you're like, yeah, I definitely want someone to automate some of these tasks. And again, some of these are really early in their infancy. Some of them are obviously much more mature. When you look at, aerial and drone use, probably the farthest around from some of these, just from a year standpoint. But yeah, I guess I'm curious too, like Chris, when you kind of compiled this together and talked about some of the other like robots that are on site, or just the reality of what robots are actually being used, like which ones stand out to you as to get people excited about like, hey, this is an amazing industry to be in because of some of these tools that are coming to help automate some of those things that we were just talking about.
We were just talking about, I was just talking to an engineer yesterday on an upcoming job that we're going to be working on. And we talked about three robots. We talked about Spot with photogrammetry. We talked about the layout robot because we wanted to lay out. So what we were doing is we have to mark where bolts are going to be in the floor before they pour the floor. So they change the rebar bracing in the floor. So we would put marks on the vapor barrier. They would actually build the rebar around those marks and then pour the floor. Then we would come back in with the overhead drilling thinking, okay, can we really do it overhead or can we do it below? So, and I think you can. I think you can point it down below. So we would have the layout robot to mark the bolts on the floor along with the walls, and then we'd have the drilling come in after that to drill the holes. So you have two robots, or three robots, including the Spot for the data capture, but you'd have two robots that are using a total station type configuration for location we would use to drill this stuff. So we could run all this stuff, in a fraction of the time, more efficient, and get the same amount of information, probably even better, because we're positioning everything with a total station. So for the construction side of it, we're already in the process of trying to implement. Well, we've got the overhead, documentation with the aerials, the drilling. We're working on that in the layout. The rebar tying, we haven't got to that point yet, and the CMU and the bricklaying and stuff like that. We're looking into those, especially with the drywall finishing, because we do big projects, and some of these projects are big rooms with lots and lots and lots of drywall. So that only makes sense. So we have that system set in place to where we can use this information pretty quickly. It wouldn't take long for us to implement it because we use basic surveying procedures to take all this stuff and implement it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, for us, it's a no-brainer.
I think the reality here, just almost like summarize kind of past this definition phase, is like they're here to stay, and it's not like Hollywood stuff either. I think that's to me kind of what stands out, and obviously like a testament to Brian and even his team of how far we've gotten. Because I think sometimes too, it just takes someone leading the pack in that way of saying, hey, this is where we're going, team. Like, this is where we're going, industry. Like, you're either going to be left behind if you don't kind of see the value and solutions that these are providing, or you're going to come along with us and you're going to see and start to embrace where that's coming. And that's really why we wanted to do this topic. It was just like, hey, the reality of robotics is it's happening, and you need to start considering it, and you need to start thinking through how and where can these help automate some of these processes that I'm doing, and eventually partner with the hardware side of it and the software side of it to make that a reality. So I want to real quick before we hop into kind of some of the misconceptions, which are going to be really, really good. I think really we're going to spend some time is really, Haydn, this is where I kind of wanted to give you some kind of speaker here of, so DroneDeploy, obviously the name DroneDeploy is obviously more synonymous with the aerial capture, but you come from the Rocos team, which if folks haven't heard kind of our acquisition timeline or really how DroneDeploy is kind of come from our humble beginnings and, about 10 years ago. Tell us a little bit about the Rocos team, what you guys were doing before we got brought in, or you guys got brought into the DroneDeploy fold back in 21, and really how you guys are playing a huge part in what we're trying to do today.
Yeah, so I always say it's hard. I don't want to speak on behalf of our founders, but um, uh, the reason for the Rocos sort of company in the first place was there's a big gap in cloud management for fleets of robots, and we're not just talking a robot type. We're talking about like a whole heterogeneous fleet of robots being on the cloud, being able to controlled, monitored, pass data. That there was a big gap in those years when Rocos was found. And because we had such a heavy core background in robotics and understood how we did, what I always say is we did the robot stuff well, right? So we've got, our software is running on automated trucks and container yards. It's running in hospitals on robots doing sort of care and medicine transportation in hospital. There's a bunch of places that the initial Rocos software is being used. And then obviously as Spot came along, there was a lot of obviously interest in Spot. This robot that could autonomously navigate and kick ass, getting around site and doing a bunch of cool stuff. So a lot of people started, how do we integrate with this robot? How do we get and from all sides, as a customer from Chris, how do I get this robot to work for me? As a sensor provider from like the likes of Trimble, like those guys, how do I get my sensor to be carried about this robot to go and do the job? So there's all these different parties coming in to say, like, let's get this thing working. So I'd say at that stage, obviously there was a big focus on ground capture within DroneDeploy, on how do we replicate what we're doing in the sky with the drones and provide that value of drones in the sky, but on a ground level once the walls and the roof are on. So the sort of introduction of 360 cameras and all that type of stuff. So we were very well placed to be like, all right, we can act as the central pivot where we can communicate to a robot in a very strong and mature way. We can now connect with sensors in a very strong and mature way, independently of that connection between the robot and the sensor, which means now we can start adding different sensors and different robotics. So it kind of put us in a very good position to be, the people to talk to get the robot to do all these different use cases. And then obviously I would say that probably we worked with DroneDeploy early on when Spot came out, trying to get, a 360 camera to work on the robot to do ground-based reality capture. And then it just sort of made sense for DroneDeploy. If we want to do robots well, if we want to automate ground-based inspection and reality capture, we might as well have a very strong robotics team. So that's how I guess, assuming I wasn't a main part of any of it, to be honest. So that's my assumption and take on exactly what probably happened, which is why we're here today, and it's awesome.
Totally. And I know, Chris, like, you obviously were using DroneDeploy before Rocos kind of got brought into the fold, and maybe like share a little bit about just how getting introduced to Haydn and their team, and working with Brian and their team too, like how that's really changed your abilities to, achieve the solutions and outcomes that you guys are wanting out on your job. I mean, I think Haydn, you said it very well, but like, give me the boots on the ground perspective from your side of it, Chris.
So when we got our robot from New York and talked to Brian, I remember Brian saying, Listen, you got to do it. You got to take one step at a time. You got too many things going on. You got to you got to slow down. Let's get the automation going, and then let's put a sensor on it, and then And I'm like, oh no, I'm going to do it all now. I wanted to break it. I wanted to see how far it could go. That's what I wanted to do. And Brian's like, you got to slow down, dude. Slow down. So that was a lot of restraint for me to slow down, because construction moves so fast. I mean, I can just picture it, in my head, that I can have it out there on this site taking photos, but instead we're in here troubleshooting, a connection, and why I couldn't get it connected inside of a building. Um, so uh, once we got that down, our provide we have guys in the company that are like the managers of the software, and one of them's DroneDeploy, uh, Derek Rolfe, and he says, well, DroneDeploy's got they got the ground robotics program. And I went, what? So then from that point, he got me in contact with Ben from DroneDeploy. And then we had a meeting with, it was Ben and Haydn, and there was I can't remember who all was in there. And then I was telling everybody what I did, and Haydn was about doing flips because he was like, that's exactly what I want to do. I want to take all this control and I want to tie it to the blah, blah, blah. So it seemed to match because we had the same vision on tying down the process of robotics and not just sending it out to do a task. Like, what's the long-term goal? We wanted to get it to do things and stuff, and how can we do that over and over again? So we found out that the link to that is just basic surveying, is tying it down to control points, tying it down to where you're at on planet Earth, and it works, and it works really well.
I think what's really cool too is like, and we'll hit on this a little bit towards the end, just like the crawl, walk, run approach. And again, we were kind of singing your praises before you hopped in with us of like, yeah, like you guys were plugging this into a process that was pretty well established, right? And you had inefficiencies in that you wanted to, apply the autonomy to, or just the automation. And I think that's what's also really important about the reality of robotics here too, is like, hey, you don't and Brian, you could probably speak to this, like you don't plug robotics in and it fixes all your all your problems. It probably honestly like exposes a lot of the things that you may not have, well established or just even well processed out. And so, yeah, I think that's just a really good point to make, is like, hey, these things don't solve problems. Honestly, they probably magnify the ones that you have that you maybe haven't worked towards, but they will for sure enhance the processes that you do have in either a really good way or a really bad way. And obviously in your guys' case, enhance it in a really positive way from the processes that you had already set.
Yeah, we had, so when we got Spot, we got the sensor, we got the scanner on it with the cameras, and it was running. And then it would go down for something, a cable, as simple as a cable. The guys that were doing the scanner are like, oh, come on, are you serious? I got to go out and scan this building. Now it's like 60 setups because it takes 4 to 5 hours to do, some of the rooms we're doing, and we can do it with Spot in like 45 minutes. Yeah. So it's like, I got to spend this whole entire day out there scanning. I'm like, yeah, sorry, I'll get it fixed as soon as I can. So that's what it kind of turned into. It turned into this, oh, this is a cool thing. It's like, oh, no, now we need it. Yeah. Because we're saving so much time.
Autonomy is kind of like the floodgates that just open up a ton of stuff where you're like, oh, once you see it and you start to recognize where it's like really bringing value and really providing solutions, it's like, all right, buckle up. Brian, I want to kick it over to you a little bit on this idea of like, what do you hear the most often about just these like misconceptions about really like Spot in particular? But like, what are things that you just hear frequently and bubbled up that I was like, hey, open forum, here's your chance to kind of speak into some of the misconceptions that you kind of hear around some of the stuff that you hear most frequently?
Yeah, I think one that you're touching on is just that like a robot doesn't have these dependencies on these external, whatever it might be, like GPS for navigation or some kind of network. I remember early on, in fact, when we were first working with Turner in New York, we were talking about how, a lot of job sites, they're connected in the sense that they might have like a cradle point or two, but they tend to be clustered by where people have desks. And, you don't really have like dependable APs that you can jump between. So at first, for safety, like very early on for like safety, we're like, the robot always has to be connected to a controller. But if you're running it autonomously, maybe you don't care, and maybe you don't need to see what it's doing, and you can just build that trust in the machine. So we actually took that away, kind of at the request of Turner and other construction customers in particular, just saying like, we don't have the networks, we can't maintain that connection, just let us run it truly autonomously, where it's got its own mission kind of internal to the robot, and it's able to execute that without you being there. And then they're like, well, what if I need to stop it? It's like, well, you can't stop it because now it's now it's not connected to anything. So it ends up being a trust building exercise, and it's like, well, I need it to to be autonomous, to do this work, to have ROI, but then I get like really nervous, like once I actually have that capability, I can run this thing at night, and do I actually trust it? So once you make it practical to get the ROI, you're just beginning like a trust exercise. I don't know if that's a misconception so much about just something that I think can be overlooked when people are planning on doing these types of technology pilots. And I think another misconception is that it's all about the mobility. Like, a lot of conversations are like, can this robot really move through these spaces? Can it really go up and down stairs? Can it really avoid obstacles? These are legitimate questions, but the issue is like that's our bread and butter. Like, we will solve all of those things. There's no doubt in my mind, and we have to a very large extent. Like, that is not the question you should be asking. The question you should be asking is, so what's so valuable about scanning every day? What do I do with 10 billion points that I collected last week? Just because I can do that now, should I? So I think that, like, the misconception about robots is it's about the robotic technology, but no, it should still be centered in business problem. Like, the robot needs to be in service to the business problem. The robot in and of itself does not have inherent value.
Man, so well said. We could camp there for a long amount of time. And
Yeah.
I think that's where we were kind of talking about a little bit before we came on. It was just like, if it's not connected to the business problem, it's pretty quick, and it gets exposed pretty quickly that, like, hey, I don't necessarily know that this is maybe the best fit. And eventually things kind of work out the way that they probably need to. But yeah, I think that's just a huge misconception to camp on for a little bit, is like, hey, if this isn't grounded in something, especially a business problem that you're trying to solve, like, hey, it just becomes, I think, marketing material that maybe you're not getting the value out of it that you really, really hope and intend to. Yeah, great point, Haydn. I'm curious too. What are kind of some of the misconceptions that you hear kind of the most around this idea and topic?
Oh, the nice thing about, I guess, this question is, and same as Brian, I'll probably get to speak to a lot of customers who are maybe a few layers above the actual practical implementation, who have dreams about what this should look like for their company. Point clouds is not synonymous with progress tracking. So the idea is, I can scan, so all of a sudden the robot must be able to create a model and tell me how much progress is done or what's changed. Like that there, no, the robot's able to collect point cloud data and deliver it in the right format to your VDC team, who should have a workflow already running that can accept, process, put in Navisworks, do their checks, which, the testament to like Turner, they did that, which is why we were successful in that place, because all we did is augment their current workflow with a more efficient way of collecting data. So that worked really well for Turner. But if you're going into a company, like Brian said, am I scanning right now? And if I can all of a sudden get a few billion points a week from an autonomous vehicle, what am I going to, how valuable is that? What is it going to mean at the end of the day? And then the second one is, yes, the robot has got a LiDAR on it, but that LiDAR isn't necessarily made for the mapping that we know and love from terrestrial scanners. It's not actually even made for mobile mapping, like the BLK ARC or one of the car-mounted mobile mappers. That LiDAR is there for the robot and the robot's ability to navigate. So sometimes people say, oh, I'm buying the LiDAR unit for the robot, so it should be able to like generate this beautiful point cloud that I can use in Navisworks. So that's probably not the case. So we really try with some of those, I guess, education and teaching the industry on what to expect, to manage expectation, is trying to say, hey, there's two different ways that the robot can scan, laser scan. You use the LiDAR, one for beautiful pictures, one for navigation. And then second of all, we're going to help you figure out or get the data into your existing pipeline in a more efficient way. But please don't expect that the robot's going to tell you all of a sudden, like when it sits down on the dock, that you are 93% compared to the 91% yesterday.
Well said, Chris. I want to quickly get over to you. I wanted to probably add a few things to that point from Haydn, but yeah, just curious to even hear kind of your perception around this too.
I get a lot of how much is that AI? That's what I get. Is that AI that's in it? No, it's not. It's not AI. It's not going to take over the world. It's not going to come and do bad things on site. But when you're in on the robotics at a ground level, if you have a robot apocalypse, then you're pretty good. But no, we hear that a lot too. That okay, we can do a point cloud. Now, does that tell us what we're off? Well, we have to compare it to a model. That's usually the big thing that we get is we have to compare it to a model, and that takes time. And there's a process in that. We had that process before Spot, but that we just shortened it when we implemented Spot into it. So it's the same process that we use. We use the same targets. We use the same control. We even use the same paths that we would if we were going to walk a terrestrial scanner around. But it just does it faster, and we still get the same quality data. But yeah, that's about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, somewhat like related to that point too is I've had a few misconceptions around like scan to BIM, and just by virtue of like, well, this is a sophisticated robot and it's out there scanning, so surely what it's giving me is it's automatically generating BIM, which is hard to imagine because BIM is so customized to each individual firm that's managing it. It's very like human enterprise to model with that level of information. But also like that technology just straight up doesn't exist outside of robotics. I mean, there's like some like primitive fitting stuff kind of focused on MEP, but like we're just not there yet with that at all. So I think it can be a good thing though, is that the use of this robot, once you start to understand what the end-to-end solution needs to be, it really shines a clarifying light on the gaps that still remain with automated modeling, with automated change detection and other types of analysis on that data, the limitations of existing modeling and scanning workflows, the limitations of site connectivity. And so like at least it starts to kind of set the priorities for, okay, like now I understand where we can improve to really make this sing and kind of become a force multiplier.
I may be shooting myself in the foot here a little bit. Just gonna I'm curious, like, why is there a misconception, or why maybe association that Spot is like doing progress tracking? Like, I'm taking a little bit of an off script question here,
Well,
but
that's what people want it to do, right? I mean, that's the like, there are a lot of use cases for reality capture, but that is kind of like project management use case number one for this data set. And I think it's a fair assumption. If I'm going to invest in this like really advanced technology, I don't just want to automate capture. I want to get to that end state of some kind of valuable reporting. So like, it's not wrong or bad to have that misconception. In fact, it's probably right to have that misconception. That is where I think we all agree we want to go. But I think if you're a company that's investing in this and you really want to come along for the journey, we really have to think about these things together, because some of these things aren't like Spot gaps or DroneDeploy gaps. They're gaps in technology that just exists anywhere in the industry. So, supporting those people who are looking into these problems and bringing that technology kind of up to speed with the rest of what we've got, I think is crucial to really scale these types of robots over the next 5 to 10 years.
Man,
Well, it's a process gap too. It's not necessarily something in what they're trying to seek information. But if they don't have the right process down even before Spot, bringing in Spot's not going to matter. It really matters because you have a set process. If you can repeat that process with humans, then you can repeat that process with robots.
well said. Hayden, you got anything to add there?
I'd say, yeah, a few times I'll have to deal with a lot of people about, why should we use Boss Dynamics and your software? Why can't we use, this other thing? So there's a lot of times I have to sort of understand the competition out there. And one of our founders actually said it really well to me, and it's almost a year ago now. He said the same thing, and it's still relevant. Our biggest competition is the maturity of the technology that we're using and the maturity of the surrounding technologies that will enable it. So we're struggling, we want to solve all the problems, but in some cases, Spot has a set of capabilities which might be limited to this customer's dream. So how do we solve that customer's dream within the limitations of what Spot can currently do, or this other robot can do, or the sensor can do, for instance? So it's going to be an exciting few years where, hopefully all the technology sort of raises together with the tide. And yeah, I guess we're trying to be part of that as much as we can to help other vendors, support everyone as a partner to say, hey, we've got a customer, your technology is great, but it needs to be able to do this thing as well. So let's come together on this journey.
Yeah, I'm adding all my sound clips in here. That is a clear applause worthy. I think just topic to camp on for a second, because it's like, man, we would be truly missing here if we didn't help like simplify that idea of what is progress tracking, how is it being done, just all those types of things. So one, thanks for the right turn. I think it's just a good good thing to touch on just in that. I want to get to another misconception, I think, Haydn, to kind of maybe tee you up a little bit here too, is just this idea of, hey, is Spot the only kind of robot or autonomy that's happening out there? Obviously, you work with a lot of folks kind of in this side of it as well. And OnSite's, a really interesting platform that just to kind of hit play here and watch this go a little bit. But yeah, talk about some of the other tools that you kind of see or that are out there that are providing kind of some of this robotic autonomy to some processes that you had mentioned earlier about, hey, I've been out on these solar farms and just the challenge that it is to go and navigate those terrain.
Yeah, I think Spot was the first thing that took the world and was like, wow, this stuff's real and it's available. Like I can use one and buy one. So we love Spot. We've been with Spot since one of the early adopters. I say early engagements, but yeah, we've had probably 3 or 4 Spots in our last 2 or 3 years. It's been, obviously it's the robot of choice, super capable. It's a quadruped, which means it can walk most places, which helps us prove a lot of concepts. But then you come to a site like this, and you think, Spot's walking, it's got, maybe a 90-minute runtime, and these solar farms are massive. I mean, I've probably smashed all my step records when I'm on these sites because, like, you're just walking and walking and walking. It's hot. Spot isn't built for that, unfortunately. Like, it's just one of those things. Like, you can't build one. There's not going to be one robot that solves them all. It's just one of those things. There's all the concepts of tracks, wheels, legs, how big they are, how heavy they are, what payloads they can carry, all to do with that job that customer is trying to achieve. So in terms of like the job that these guys are wanting to achieve is, yes, they have a rather heavy payload that's got real capable thermal, real capable cameras, and they need to be able to go around all these sites and take a photo of, in this case, a barcode that's this big on a solar panel. They have to go and document every single barcode for a use case. Now, that's a lot of photos and a lot of zoomed in, real like dusty labels that you have to take photos of. So nothing that Spot with the cam would probably be able to do it, but only for an hour and a half, then go charge and then come back again. Whereas these guys can run for hours. They've got big batteries in those robots. They can get through a big chunk of site, go back and charge, and then carry on. Could be autonomous, could be with the remote operator. All depends on the workflow that they're currently using. And then in saying that, we've got other robots that are slightly smaller than this on a wheeled platform that do almost exactly the same thing in a solar farm. So it's all a big scale or balance of what do I need the robot to do? How long do I need the robot to run for? What are the conditions? All that type of stuff. I think, yeah, in this case, the environment's going to determine what the robot needs to be. And then also there's the whole price point part of it as well. One of the big limiters within the construction industry is that robots and the technology around this sort of autonomy, it can be quite expensive. And like we're trying to tell you, everyone in this conversation, is the sort of juice worth the squeeze right now? Everyone's trying to figure out, like, is this efficiency that I'm getting worth the cost and the time that someone's going to have to do to set it up, look after it, and all that type of stuff. So I think as the industry changes, there might be different form factors that will suit better different sort of, I say suit better use cases or different use cases. So I always use the wild example of, yes, we can have one spot that can walk up, this 15-story building and do everything we want. It's 100% possible. Let's go for it. We can do it. But what happens if what happens if we had a robot that cost 5,000? Would you then buy 15 of them and put them on every level that does the same thing at the same time? So now you're also multiplying because Spot can only be in one place at one time. Now you have 15 doing the same thing at the same time. So there's all these other ideas of what is the right job, what is the right robot for the job. But yeah, nothing comes, I'll say this honestly, nothing comes close to the way Spot can navigate around a site at the moment, which is pretty cool to watch and be a part of.
Yeah, well said. This has just been awesome, super relevant and relatable content. I want to get to a section here just to kind of run and get us to kind of close out where we're going here. Is really just this idea. This is something that we try to do towards the end here. Is like, all right, there's a crawl, walk, and a run here, right? There's folks that are on here that are maybe even before they're crawling, just like continuing to explore, continuing to understand kind of where they're at in this journey. And then there's some folks that are probably walking or running. And I guess I kind of want to kick it to you, Chris, a little bit. I stole these from your slide of just how you kind of approached a crawl, walk, run method at Turner, and just kind of give us a little bit of like context or understanding of how these kind of became your crawl, walk, run approach.
Yeah, so that when New York had it, that was their crawl. They wanted to see if it was even capable. Can I walk over rebar? Can I walk over a pallet? Can I walk over debris? Can I go through water? Things like that. So it was just this sheer mobility. Can I get around a job site, because a job site's constantly changing? So that's when we found out, okay, yeah, it works. So let's try to make this autonomous. That's when things got a little more challenging, because the job site's always changing. We have an example would be is that we have these plastic stairs that you get in and out of areas. They're just carry them. You just put them in your hand, and you carry them, and you get them into areas that you have to walk up and down to. Well, some trade partners keep it in the middle of the floor for tomorrow. So Spot was walking and walked right up the steps and right off the other side, and crashed. So that was the autonomy side of it. It's like, well, okay, how do we know now? Is that correct? How do we, if we have a map, how do we tell it to say, okay, there's something in the way. Now, if it's in the way, now what do I do? Do I find a different path? And that's where the map comes into play, having a map that takes you everywhere you need to be, or takes Spot everywhere he needs to be. And then once we got that down, I mean, Haydn laughs because of this, because we went through all kinds of. The good example is we were on site. We had made the map. We started to run a mission, and they were coming in with these huge platforms of pieces of equipment and set it right down in the middle of the path. And I went, that's a site. That's construction. So now it was like, oh, I get it. I mean, we even had some of the guys from DroneDeploy, like Flynn's like, man, we just did this. And I'm like, yeah, you have to do it again. So it got to that point where you really have to know your site. You have to create your maps to get that autonomy. And then once we got that, then it was just, okay, let's just add stuff on it. Let's add a scanner. Let's add a camera. Let's put on a sensor of some sort and just let it run. So once we got the autonomy piece down, everything else fell into place.
Totally. And Brian, I'm curious
too.
to
comment on that.
Oh, go for it. Yeah.
That situation with the staircase, because I was actually on site with Chris at that time, and I was looking through our software. I was remote, and I was watching through the eyes of the robot what was happening. And Chris was by the robot, and we had this whole this mission planned out, and the robot was collecting data for Chris, and Chris was just walking behind it, monitoring it. And in our head, the robot was walking down this path, and we were thinking it's fine. But all of a sudden, because the staircase, which is only 2 steps and then like a cliff, was somewhere near it, the robot was like, staircase, I see it. And then he just sort of like swerved, and through the eyes, all I saw was roof. And then I just hear Chris, because when I saw it remote, I was in the other data hall. I hear Chris saying something, and then you just see nothing. And then Chris comes back with the robot. Ah, this thing fell.
Man.
So yeah,
Brian, I'm curious too, like what do you encourage folks when, so someone raises their hand, they're like, hey, I want to try this. Like, how do you kind of help navigate where they're at in that crawl, walk, run? And like, what do you hear the most kind of when you hear folks that are starting to get interested about it?
Yeah, I mean, Turner has a long history with us. They were one of our very first customers in 2020 in the early adopter program. And so I think like what Chris is talking about, it was a different era too, which is, you know, you had to build trust in these basic layers of mobility and autonomy and payloads. But now there's an ecosystem out there, right? Like, you know, the work that DroneDeploy has done with Turner is commercially available. Like, you can ideally just start to run because, you know, we've built an ecosystem with our partners in this industry. But I still think, you know, first and foremost, because we have that, and because you don't have to worry about your R&D group doing all of this like extraneous testing with the robot, it becomes all the more important that you can actually isolate what's valuable about this robot. You know, what is the conversation to be had around ROI? What are you doing? Because these solutions are really revolving around automated reality capture. Like, what are you doing with reality capture today that this can really help accelerate or even fundamentally change? So I think that's always the first question. I try to, you know, don't worry so much about if the robot can walk your site. I assure you that is not the hardest problem. The technology is not the hardest problem. The hardest problem is, you know, being able to clearly state what the value is for the business problems. And we stay humble and we learn from customers who want to use this stuff to improve how they're practicing. So we really want and need to hear those things to keep advancing our partnerships and to keep advancing not just the robotic technology, but the whole end-to-end solution and ecosystem that satisfies that, so that you're not like, time to start a 5-year robotics research program, and instead you're, you know, off the shelf, like, I just need better project management, and this helps with, you know, A, B, and C use cases. Great. And it's, you know, relatively easy to install and get trained on. Like, that's where we need to be. Otherwise we're, you know, stuck with R&D groups, I think, eternally.
Yeah, well said. And Hayden, just to kind of have you close it out there, like from the DroneDeploy side, like what do you kind of find yourself saying the most to encourage folks of like where they're at and either crawling, walking, or just like even exploring? Like, I love what you said, Brian, of like, hey, we've created this ecosystem for partners like us to tap into and like bring that speed to value and speed to solution so quickly. And I mean, that's a huge testament to your guys' team working with us, being so close with what the problems are, what solutions we want to provide. And yeah, I guess, Hayden, I'm curious, like, what do you find yourself saying to folks in that kind of methodology of, hey, are you wanting to crawl here, walk here, run here?
yeah. So yeah, I mean, we talk to them obviously and try and bring realistic expectations as to what's available right now. But then we look at the bigger picture and we say, all right, we have a vision. This vision is we want the robot. This is the jobs that the robot needs to do. So then we can obviously, you know, break that up into what we need the robot to do day to day, or component by component to get that done. If you are a customer who's thinking about like off the shelf, and I have this research team and I'm going to break up my dream into these pieces of work, and then every time I'm going to go and do a piece of work, I'm going to go to a robotic vendor off the shelf and try and prove this concept, that limits people in terms of achieving that overall dream. Whereas the value of partnership is like, all right, we in the horse race, we choosing a horse, we backing that horse, let's go for it. And you've obviously got to choose the right horse, but we've put ourselves in such a position where we value all those partnerships, where we have a mining customer who wants to achieve this amazing thing in 5 years' time. That's brilliant, because that allows us to line up for the next 5 years all the pieces that we need to do to solve that industry problem. And it's not a problem that can be solved overnight or in a 3-month POC. It's literally a 5-year strategy with the right partnerships over those 5 years, with the right robots, the right sensors, the right people to build that dream. So we're always trying to help people on that level. Think big. How do we break it up and sort of come on this journey together with partnerships? And, obviously having a partnership with Boston Dynamics means we are in the position we are in now. We would never have been here if we were trying to build something on our own. So having a very close relationship with the engineering team at Boston Dynamics has been incredibly powerful.
I think maybe just to kind of give you maybe the last word there, Chris, like you've gotten to see this partnership from the customer's perspective, right? So like no better person to probably ask this question to, but like, what's it like as an end customer of working with Brian and their team and Haydn and our team? Like, does it feel like two companies? Does it feel like one? Like, just maybe give us some of your thoughts around that as kind of a closing thought.
No, it feels it it's really unique. Is all I have to say. I've worked many years with different companies. This is probably the first time in my work experience that I've worked with two different companies that are trying to achieve the same goal, and they have to work together. And it's a seamless partnership. There's been times when I've called Brian, asked questions, or even anybody on Brian's team, and they're like, "Well, this is what we could do," and then I have to go to Haydn and Haydn's team, and they're like, "Well, we could try this." So it's a combination. It has to work together. If it doesn't work together, we wouldn't have been able to achieve what we have. The Boston Dynamics Spot is a fantastic platform. It's so versatile, and paired up with the DroneDeploy platform, it's everything that we need in a product, and it achieves everything that we want to do, and it gives us room to expand. So we have scalability with it.
Yeah, well said. We are bumping up against time. For the questions that are in, we haven't done this before. We haven't had such a great long conversation. One, I appreciate you guys sticking with us even here so long. I'm going to maybe give you guys some homework here on the LinkedIn event. Some folks have been putting in some questions here. Would love for you guys at, sometime here the rest of the week to kind of chime in and add your guys' thoughts there, just to see they've actually been really great questions that apologize we couldn't get to. One, I just want to honor your guys' time and make sure that we get you guys squared away here. But thank you guys. One, this is awesome. I think conversations like this are really hoping to achieve the goals that we have, is just simplifying this idea. This is probably one topic that gets over-marketed in ways that make it probably more confusing, honestly, which is not the goal. Our goal is to bring a lot of simplicity and clarity to it. And what better people to do that with Chris, Brian, you, and Haydn as well. So appreciate your guys' time. I do want to make a little plug here as well. Haydn and Brian will both be at our user conference this year. And Chris, unfortunately, will be at another conference at that time. But if you guys are interested in wanting to hear more about this, Haydn and Brian will both be there in person, and a couple other folks from Chris's team will be there as well. So encourage you guys to check that out. Just a really great, tangible next step of what it is that if you guys are really interested to hear more about this topic, we actually created a little discount code for the folks that are listening in live. This actually ends on Sunday night. So if you're actually tuning into this as a recording, sorry, this code won't work for you if you tune in or try to use it past Sunday night. But appreciate you guys, one, making the time to come out to this event to meet a lot of these folks in person, because I think there's just a lot of interest and there's a lot of opportunity for us to really drive a lot of simplicity in this area of reality capture. So one, thank you guys so much again for making the time to come out. I'm going to kind of close this out here. Appreciate you guys. So thank you guys again for tuning in. Again, if you are interested in coming out to that user conference, check out some of the information in our link as well. But in 2 weeks, another great topic. We're just going to keep the ball rolling here with these conversations that we've been able to have. We're going to bring Ted and Jay into this next topic that we're going to talk about in innovating inspections. Again, another really hot topic that a lot of folks are interested to know more about. We've brought two of the best. I mean, we keep hitting the jackpot here with folks to come in and talk about this stuff. And so I hope you guys are really excited. This event is live on LinkedIn, so you guys can start to register for it and get it on your calendars. But until then, we really appreciate your guys' time. Thank you for tuning in with us. Again, we hope you find these are meaningful and helpful conversations for you guys to tune into, and we will see you in a couple weeks. Take care.